Imagine for a second being told to walk straight into a wilderness that practically no one from your country has ever laid eyes on. You are stepping right off the edge of the known map. You're leaving behind everything familiar, every safety net you've ever known. What's waiting out there in all that vastness? Well, nobody truly knew, but what followed became one of the absolute greatest adventures in American history. Welcome to today's Explainer. We're pulling up a chair to the campfire to dive deep into the incredible, gritty, and totally awe-inspiring story of the Lewis and Clark expedition.
Now let's really ground ourselves in this reality. No GPS, no roads, no maps whatsoever, just endless, untamed wilderness. Think about that. Today, most of us panic if our cell signal drops for 5 minutes. But back in 1804, these folks accepted a staggering challenge. We're talking about navigating treacherous, raging rivers, encountering entirely unknown tribes, and putting thousands of miles of rugged earth between themselves and their front doors. On paper, their mission sounded wonderfully simple. In reality, it bordered on the impossible. They were tasked with stepping into America's newly purchased territory and figuring out exactly what lay beyond the horizon. So, let's set the stage with the great American unknown and how expanding the nation in 1803 kicked this whole saga off, launching the expedition and assembling the Corps of Discovery. Okay, so in 1803, President Thomas Jefferson made a massive call that would absolutely transform the young nation. The Louisiana Purchase effectively doubled the size of the United States overnight. It was hands down a monumental real estate deal. But there was a glaring problem staring them right in the face. Practically nobody had a clue what actually existed out there. The maps of the day were basically just blank pages. So Jefferson needed answers, and he needed explorers brave enough, and honestly, maybe crazy enough, to venture into the absolute unknown. He tapped his trusted secretary, Meriwether Lewis, to lead the charge. Lewis knew he couldn't do it alone, so he invited his good friend William Clark to share command. Together, they meticulously built the legendary group we now know as the Corps of Discovery. Jefferson's game plan for them was incredibly ambitious. The immense weight of it really boiled down to 4 critical steps. First, map the rivers and landscapes. They had to figure out the very veins of this new territory. Second, study the plants and animals, literally cataloging entirely new worlds of biology. Third, establish relations with Native American tribes, which was an absolutely vital diplomatic necessity. And fourth, the ultimate prize, find a practical water route to the Pacific Ocean. The entire future of American westward expansion depended completely on their ability to check off every single one of these daunting boxes. No pressure, right? Now, like we said, on paper, this mission looked clean, organized, straightforward. But in reality, it was downright brutal. On May 14, 1804, they started pushing their heavy boats up the Missouri River, and reality hit them like a ton of bricks. Right out of the gate, they're fighting violent currents that literally threatened to drag them backward. Extreme summer heat baked them day after day, and the mosquitoes, we're talking thick, relentless swarms clouding the riverbanks, biting them raw, all while they had to painstakingly manage their finite supplies. Every single mile was pure uncertainty. Yet despite that massive, painful gap between a polite plan made in Washington and the unforgiving reality of the wild, they set their jaws and pressed on.
Which brings us to discovering a new world and documenting the West.
As they pushed deeper into total uncertainty, Lewis and Clark's scientific achievements became nothing short of staggering. I mean, they were meticulously documenting species that sounded like they were straight out of a myth to people back east. They found vast underground towns of prairie dogs. They spotted incredibly sure-footed bighorn sheep clinging to sheer cliff faces. They came face to face with the terrifying sheer power of the massive grizzly bear. And they stood in awe of earth-shaking, thunderous herds of bison that stretched literally as far as the eye could see. Their detailed journals weren't just simple travel logs. They became a genuine scientific treasure trove. For the very first time, vivid, highly detailed facts about the American West were making their way back home.
But they certainly weren't out there alone. Let's talk about allies in the wilderness, specifically diplomacy and guides. The expedition encountered dozens of Native American tribes along the way. Some of these powerful nations welcomed the weary explorers with open arms, offering crucial trade and shelter. Others, understandably, were pretty cautious about this group of heavily armed strangers moving through their land. Because of this delicate balance, diplomacy wasn't just a political formality. It was quite literally a daily matter of survival. And right at the center of this diplomatic tightrope was one of the most vital figures of the entire journey, Sacagawea, a young Shoshone woman who served as an interpreter and guide. Her intimate knowledge of the rugged landscape helped them navigate highly dangerous, unfamiliar territory. And honestly, her very presence, often carrying her infant son, was absolutely vital in signaling to local tribes that this was a peaceful party. Make no mistake about it, history makes it incredibly clear that without her steadfast help, the entire mission very likely would have failed.
Moving on to reaching the Pacific and the grueling task of crossing the Rockies.
Just think about the sheer span of time these folks endured. After months and months of continuous, back-breaking travel, they faced their biggest nightmare yet, crossing the towering, unforgiving Rocky Mountains. Here, the journey went from incredibly difficult to nearly impossible. Severe food shortages threatened their lives. They were starving, exhausted, pushed to their absolute limits. Freezing, bitter weather ground their progress down to a painful crawl through deep, relentless snow. Every single step was a battle, yet they just kept putting one foot in front of the other. And finally, by November 1805, the air changed. The rivers widened. They heard the distant crash of waves. They had reached the Pacific Ocean. After traveling thousands of miles through unmapped, untamed territory, they did it. They actually crossed the continent. Let's look at the legacy left behind and how this truly transformed a nation. 8,000 miles. Just pause and really let that jaw-dropping number sink in. 8,000 miles. After surviving a long, wet, and incredibly hard winter near the Pacific coast, they packed up and began the massive journey back. Finally, in September 1806, Lewis and Clark arrived safely back where the whole thing started, in St. Louis. They had traveled those 8,000 miles by foot, by struggling boat, and by sheer, unyielding willpower. That number represents a staggering physical toll on the human body, for sure, but it also represents an unprecedented amount of knowledge they brought back with them. Their relentless journey dramatically and permanently blew the lid off America's understanding of its newly acquired territory. The Lewis and Clark expedition was so much more than just a scouting mission into the woods. It was a monumental journey that fundamentally shaped the entire future of the United States. Their hard-won discoveries directly opened the door to westward expansion, turning rumors into solid reality. Their meticulous, hand-drawn maps completely transformed American geography forever. And beyond the hard data, the sheer magnitude of their story, this epic tale of undeniable courage, relentless curiosity, and gritty determination, it inspired future explorers all over the globe. They cemented what is easily one of the greatest, most daring achievements in the history of human exploration.
More than 2 centuries later, the enduring legacy of the Corps of Discovery continues to inspire historians, scientists, and everyday adventurers everywhere. Because it reminds us of one fundamental truth. All grand adventures, all massive shifts in human understanding, they have to start somewhere. They start with the raw courage to leave the familiar behind and step out into the dark. So I'll leave you with this question to chew on. What great discovery will you make with a single step into the unknown? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and hey, keep exploring.